Okay, everyone, thank you for joining us. My name is Alan Levine, Executive Director of Hasbara Fellowships. And for those who haven't been in one of these leadership sessions before, we've started doing them here, and they're a great opportunity to get everybody together. We have, as most people on the call know, we have Hasbara Fellows on over 90 campuses now across the U.S. and Canada. And this is really a great opportunity to get our alumni, our Hasbara Fellows, all together in the same room. Now that Zoom meetings are done so often and people are used to it, it's a great chance to just come together again, do continuing education. It's a great chance to welcome our donor network, who also joins us for these meetings, and it's a great opportunity to have you together in the same forum here with our student leaders from around the country. And so I want to thank everybody for joining us. And those of you who aren't familiar, Hasbara Fellowships, we've been around since 2001, and we've been working on campuses across Canada and across the United States to empower Jewish and other pro-Israel student leaders as we fight against anti-Semitism and against anti-Israel propaganda that we see on our campuses. And today we're really honored to be able to actually welcome one of our alumni, member of Knesset Dan Illouz. Dan, thank you for joining us, and we'll hand over the floor to you in a minute. And really looking forward to hearing your insights here. And we really are. It's a great opportunity, and we're really thankful to have you, Dan. Thank you. And before we do jump in, I just want to mention, just take a minute to just mention the terrorist attacks that we saw in Israel, unfortunately over the weekend. And we saw father and son who were murdered by terrorists, Shai Silas and Aviad Nir, and we saw a school teacher murdered in a separate attack over the weekend. And it just would be remiss if we didn't just mention them and acknowledge them for a moment. I also just want to acknowledge that we also saw a weekend where many of you will have seen the reports. Kosher restaurants were attacked in Los Angeles over Shabbat, and it's also at a time where I look at this and think of Canada as well, where there's a report that came out this month that again confirmed what many of us probably already knew, that Jews in Canada are the most targeted group in Canada for hate crimes. And I just think of it all in the same space, and to think, it really is a reminder that anti-Semitism is a problem everywhere, and that we have to fight it everywhere. And whether you're a Jew in Israel or a Jew in Montreal or Los Angeles, it's unacceptable, and we have to come together, no matter where we are, to fight against it. And just in that spirit, I wanted to just open up and have this discussion. And so I want to thank everyone for being here, for taking the time to be part of Hasbara, to work with us in our mission. So thank you to all of you for being here, for joining us. With that said, I want to just introduce briefly here Mr. Philippe Maman, who is a board member of Hasbara Canada, and want to give you the floor here as you introduce our guest speaker. Philippe, you were a Hasbara Fellow at Concordia University in 2010, I want to say.
Exactly.
So been already over a decade now since you were a Hasbara Fellow on campus, and now you've joined the board of Hasbara Canada. And so want to give you the opportunity here to just say a few words and introduce our guest speaker. So Philippe, go ahead. Welcome.
Thanks, Alan. So for those of you, my name is Philippe Maman. I am a member of the board of directors of Hasbara Canada. I was a Hasbara Fellow and the president of Concordia Students for Israel in 2010. It's a pleasure for me to give back now as a member of the board and to help Hasbara empower and train Jewish and pro-Israel students and leaders across Canada and the US. I want to thank all the students, alumni, and members of the Hasbara community from across Canada and the US for joining us today, and for taking the time to help Hasbara in its mission to empower Jewish and pro-Israel students. I have the pleasure of introducing our guest speaker, a fellow Montreal native and family friend, Dan Illouz. MK Illouz was born to Moroccan Jewish parents here in Montreal, where he attended McGill University, and he served as a Hasbara Fellow and President of Hillel in 2007 to 2008. At the age of 23 in 2009, MK Illouz made Aliyah to Israel, where he served in the IDF, earned his master's degree, got married, and then got involved in politics. Prior to his recent inauguration into the Knesset, he served as a member of the Jerusalem City Council and as a member of the Hit-Orechut Party, a local Jerusalem party made up of people from all walks of Israel's society, dedicated to diversity and unity in Jerusalem and Israel society, which is an important theme for our call today. In 2022, MK Illouz chose to run for Knesset under the Likud's party list. He was inaugurated in January 2023. Today, he is one of the leading voices of the State of Israel in the international arena and the future of the Likud. With that, I'm going to turn it over to MK Illouz. Thank you, Dan, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Philippe. Thank you, Alan. I'm very excited to be here. But before I speak about my excitement, I do want to echo Alan's comments about the terrorist attack that there was today here in Israel. Obviously, the memory of the victim is on everyone's mind. And unfortunately, there have been too many terrorist attacks in the last few months, especially in the last few days. We definitely, I can say as a politician here in Israel that we need to do a better job protecting our people. But we also need to keep the victims in our minds and their memories in our minds, and also pray for the injured, which are still fighting for their lives. So after having said that, I am excited to be here today with all of you. As Philippe and Alan both mentioned, I myself was a Hasbara Fellow a long time ago, a long time ago, 2007. That's what you said, Philippe. So I trust you on that. I didn't check. And I remember when I myself was fighting for Israel on campuses in Canada, in Montreal, and the tools that I got from Hasbara in order to do this in a much more effective way. And it's not only tools that helped me on campus, and this is one thing that I can say, it's also tools that helped me in life afterwards, because those were leadership tools that helped build me as a leader, and afterwards enter the political arena more ready and better equipped in order to deal with whatever comes my way. And so I'm very happy, just as Philippe said, he wanted to give back by joining the board. So I'm very happy to do this webinar to try and give back a little bit to the organization that gave me a lot. I usually like to do these talks where I speak quite shortly, actually, in the beginning, and then open the floor for questions and answers, because I think that it's much more interesting for you to hear answers to questions that actually matter to you, and not things that matter to me and might not matter to you guys. And so I'll speak briefly in the beginning. I'll speak a little bit about myself, about what brought me to Israeli politics, even though Philippe, you did an amazing job, but I'll try to add a little bit of my perspective. And afterwards, we'll open the floor for questions. I imagine Alan will be moderating the questions and answers. So I was born and raised in Montreal, Canada, in the Jewish community, in a very Zionist home in the Moroccan community of Canada. Together with Philippe, we were almost neighbors. And growing up, I was in Jewish day school, and I always knew that Israel was very important to me. And as I grew up, towards the end of my secondary school, tichon, as we say in Hebrew, I lost my English. This is a sign that I'm doing well in Israel, right? So towards the end of high school, I started becoming even more involved in everything that has to do with Israel. It happened at the time of the Second Intifada. It was a time in which a lot of things happened that shocked me. One of the things was the lynch in Ramallah. I don't know how young people are on this call, but the people that remember that, I'm talking about when the Palestinians with blood on their hands were so proud, showing the Palestinian police, right, showed the blood on their hand, and were so happy of the lynch, with crowds cheering for the lynch that was happening in a police station. And that really shocked me. That's one of the images that I remember that really shocked me. Another image was actually in your alma mater, Philippe, which is Concordia, where Netanyahu, then Minister of Finance, I think. No, he was out of politics then, I think.
Out of government.
Out of government, yeah. I actually reminded him that he was supposed to come to Montreal in order to speak at Concordia, and he just wasn't allowed. There were riots outside, and it was too dangerous for him to actually come to campus. And a lot of people in the Jewish community, me included, waited in that room for the speech of the Prime Minister of Israel. And those people screaming for human rights and things like that didn't allow free speech, and didn't allow academic freedom, and they didn't allow him to actually give his opinion. And whatever people here think of Netanyahu nowadays, I don't know if there's, I imagine that there's diverging opinions in this room. But one thing that's clear is that he definitely has a right to give his opinion in an academic freedom environment. Definitely in an academia that also knew how to invite dictators such as Ahmadinejad in Colombia and all of these places, and where the riots for human rights didn't stop these things. And so that really truly shocked me. Those two things led me to decide that I wanted to dedicate my life to Israel at that young age. And afterwards, I also decided to move to Israel. That happened after I finished McGill Law School in McGill in Montreal. And even though I had, thank God, if you know, McGill is a very good university, so I had a lot of opportunities all around the world to work as a lawyer. But I decided that if I wanted to dedicate my life to Israel, then the best way to do it was from Israel. And that's when I decided to also move to Israel, and here dedicated my life to public service. Since making Aliyah, I've been involved in politics. I was, as was said, a member of the Jerusalem City Council. That was my first elected job, but I was also in many advisory positions beforehand. The advisor to the Likud faction in the Knesset. I worked with Nir Barkat when he was mayor of Jerusalem. I also worked for the Zionist Organization of America. And in the last election, the Likud has primaries, and so I decided that I wanted to run for one of the spots reserved for new immigrants, and I won this spot. It was an uphill battle because for those of you interested in politics, I was facing two MKs, which were two previous MKs and one sitting MK. Three people that actually had experience as an MK. They were already known on the national stage, but thank God, thanks to a lot of work, and also I believe an agenda that spoke to a lot of people, I was able to get elected to that spot. That was number 33 on the Likud list, and if everyone remembers, the Likud got how many seats in the last election? 32 seats. And so God sent me a message that I needed to be a little bit more patient. I had to wait a few more weeks for the government to be established and one of the ministers to quit in the Norwegian law. I'm not going to get into all of the details, but basically 3 weeks afterwards or a month afterwards, I entered the Knesset. And since then, I've been working in the Knesset. The agenda that brought me to the Knesset is actually... not all of it is actually related to things that I imagine are interesting to Hasbara Fellowship. Maybe they're interesting to some of you individually, I imagine, but not necessarily to you as an organization. But I do want to speak about it a little bit, just so that you get a little bit of a sense of who you're talking to. One of the main things that brought me to the Knesset is economic issues. I believe that Israel is on the one hand an economic miracle. There's no question about that. However you look at it, it's just incredible how the Israeli economy has grown over the years. But on the other hand, there are a lot of problems in the Israeli economy, especially when it comes to the cost of living. And I believe that the main reason for that has to do with some of the leftovers of some very socialist, even semi-communist economic policies that were existent in the creation of the state of Israel, right? The people who created the state of Israel were absolutely amazing people, but they also had some very clear economic ideologies, which I personally disagree with, very, very socialist and even semi-communist. At the beginning of the creation of the state of Israel, it wasn't even clear if our natural ally was America or Russia. Thank God we chose right and we went with America, with the Soviet Union right back then. Thank God we chose right and went with the democratic world and with the freedom-loving countries of America, but because of the economic policy, not because of other things, right? So don't understand me any. It's not that they like dictatorships; it's that they thought of a lot of them believed in very socialist economics, and so that's how they led the government, and it led to a very central planning type of government that up until today you have a lot of leftovers of that, which I plan to break as a policy. As a policymaker. For example, in the farming market in Israel, it's one of the only countries in the world where you actually have a planned market. What does that mean? It means that the government decides who can grow what, how much of which produce they can grow, where they can do it, and all of these things. And so you end up having some ridiculous situation where people just throw produce out because they're not allowed to actually sell it. They grew it without permit, so they're not allowed to sell it. And instead of having competition that can lower prices, that's even without even talking about barriers to international trade, even within Israel, instead of having internal competition, you end up having a lot of monopolies, which are not good for the cost of living, are not good for the economy, are not good for growth. So that's one of the agendas. The other agenda has to do with foreign policy. I am very, very involved in parliament to parliament foreign policy, parliament to parliament diplomacy. I know that I have an upper hand when it comes to that, when it comes to other members of Knesset, because I speak English, I speak French, and so I use these tools that I have in order to try to advance Israel on the international stage. A lot of what we do when it comes to parliament diplomacy is actually bipartisan. It's something that you don't see in the news much because they like showing in the news that the opposition and the coalition hates each other and are always fighting. But actually, when it comes to diplomacy, we often do it together. Sometimes it's actually showing other parliament the disagreements that we have. But there's also a value to that, of showing that there are many sides in Israel's democracy. There's also a value to showing the diversity that there is in Israel. And so we do that usually not only one side, but parliament, but opposition and coalition together. I'm in the IPU, the International Parliament Union, which is an international organization of parliament members from all around the world, together with another 3 members of Knesset, which are 2 from the opposition and 1 from the coalition together with me. So we're 4 total, 2 and 2. I also lead the Abraham Accords caucus in the Knesset, since I believe really that the Abraham Accords are something that is revolutionary to the Middle East, in my opinion, to the world, definitely to Israel. And I got a sneak peek of things that Alan is interested in talking to. So I imagine that we'll speak more about the Abraham Accords afterwards. So I'll leave that for then. Another issue which is important for me and is on the table, and if people want to discuss it, you guys can ask. I'm fine with asking, but I believe also strongly in Jewish sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. And so that's obviously not something which is a consensus, but it's something that I truly believe in. And I try to advance sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, both the application of formal sovereignty, but even more importantly, just the ability of Jews to live and thrive in these areas of what I see as the cradle of our civilization and as the heart of our homeland. Because when I dreamed of Israel growing up, with as much as I love Tel Aviv, and I really do love every centimeter of Israel, my dreams were more about Jerusalem, definitely, and then about all of these biblical cities that our roots are in, whether it's Bethlehem, Shechem, Hebron, and Judea and Samaria is where really the cradle of our civilization is, and that's why I believe that Jews should be. It's more than I believe that Jews should be allowed to live there. I think that the roots of our rights to the land of Israel are there. And if we lose that, then we lose a lot of the justification for coming back to Israel. We end up being some type of, like our enemies try to describe us, some type of a colonialist project to solve the European Jewish problem. And that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the return of the Jewish people to their homeland. And that includes Judea and Samaria. Now, I don't deny that some other people disagree with me and are strong Zionists, no less than I am, but that's my Zionist vision. And so that's a little bit of my my ideology. I'd be happy to expand on anything, but as I said, and as you already learned to see, when a politician says that he'll speak shortly, he's lying. So I also lied. But Alan, you can take over and moderate questions if you want.
Of course, Dan. Thank you so much. Thank you for those remarks. And I wrote down only 5 questions to ask you, and then we're going to let the audience jump in. But while you're talking, I erased them and I wrote all new questions. So we'll try to get through everything here. And I guess I just wanted to mention, where you started with one of the things that motivated you to take on a leadership position on your campus and then to make Aliyah was that infamous incident at Concordia University, which by now is kind of ancient history because there's been so many anti-Israel, unfortunately, events and anti-Semitic events on campuses. But those who don't recall, it was when Bibi Netanyahu came to speak and in the end did not give the speech. The protests were so intense at Concordia in Montreal that the protesters succeeded in blocking the former prime minister, which is that's what he was then. The former prime minister of Israel came to speak on a North American campus where we believe in democracy, and the protesters were so intense and they succeeded in blocking him from speaking. And that actually, I long time since I've gotten a chance to tell this story, but that was one of the motivators when the founder of Hasbara Fellowships was when he founded the organization. It was that event at Concordia. I think he says more than any other event at the time. And now he's from Chicago. He was at Northwestern University himself. It wasn't necessarily a friendly campus either, but it was that event in Montreal that said we've got to start something. And actually, the first ever hire that he made, so the first ever staff person was Patrick Amar, who many of our Hasbara fellows know as since he's one of our educators now, and he was the Hillel president of Concordia at the time. And
it was his 5 minutes of fame back then. That's because they made movies and videos on that and everything, and you see Patrick Amar right there in the middle. Yeah.
Right. He was sort of the first Hasbara fellow, and after that event at Concordia, and of course, shortly after, we had the first Hasbara trip to Israel in 2001. Students all across Canada and the U.S. But that was definitely the one of the catalysts. And anyway, I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, I have no question mark at the end of that, but I just wanted to react there. And you gave us a little sort of smorgasbord. You mentioned different policy areas, different things you're working on. One question I had, and I think it's on a lot of people's mind, is just the judicial reform, which is it seems like now, at least part of the agenda was passed. It seems like the protests have calmed down a bit. And I think here on this call, at Hasbara, we have lots of viewpoints. I'm sure we have plenty of people in this Zoom room that were for it, many against it, and probably some undecided as well. But I think the reason we're all here, the reason we all come together is to fight anti-Semitism. It's to do pro-Israel advocacy on our campuses. And so regardless of our views on an internal Israeli affairs, I think we all come together for one mission. And I think in that spirit, I think we all have been wanting to see unity again for the last 6 months or so in Israel. And my question for you, Dan, is: are we achieving that unity? Should we expect to see more action on judicial reform? If so, when? And how do you think about that issue as you do your work in the Knesset?
So honestly, this is a very, very strong question, which I can give a whole lecture on, but I'll try to be brief. Again, I'm a politician, so I'm lying right now as I'm saying these words. I'll try to be brief. and answer your question. I'll start by saying that what my position is. I believe in the judicial reform. I not only believe in it, I also ran on it. I didn't mention it as my main agendas because after entering the Knesset, so many people were already talking about it that I decided I'll let other people do the talking, and I'll focus on other areas which I think are less focused on, and that was my strategic decision. But I truly believe in it. I think that Israel needs change when it comes to the judicial system in Israel. Israel is an anomaly when we look at all of the democratic countries around the world, both with the amount of activism that judges have and also that they use, and also with the way that they're nominated. And these two things together creates a large sense, widespread sense in Israel that the judges not only are too active when it comes to policy making, but they are also from a very closed group of people that do not represent the deep values of the Israeli society. You know, in law school, I was in McGill Law School. In law school, they often teach us that the justification for judges intervening in policy is that they represent the deep values of the country, and they're not influenced by politics. Now, no one wants judges to be influenced by politics, right? Even after the judicial reform even after the most extreme versions of the proposals that were on the table, no one wanted the judges to not be independent after they were nominated. The whole question was, how would they be nominated? After they're nominated, they stay independent, right? They shouldn't be influenced by this election or that election. That's obviously true. But the second side of the coin is that they should reflect the deep values of the state of Israel. And I don't think that there's any of any state, right? Any country. And I don't think that there's any way to do that other than having the people a part of the nomination process of who their judges is. And it can be in different formats. It can be through, like it's done in the States, sometimes in some states, which is direct elections. That's very extreme, right, on a comparative level. Or it can be by keeping our model, which is right now in Israel, which is a committee, which is quite close, but just changing who sits on this committee, and then there's an argument of how do you change it exactly. But I truly believe that for the good of the court, that for the people to start trusting the courts again, we need to reform the judicial system. After saying that, we in the coalition understand that the amount of opposition, to be honest, I didn't foresee this amount of opposition because I really thought that it was clear that I was right. But I guess that's why you have a strong opposition, which is fine. That's what a democracy is. I didn't foresee this amount of opposition. But in order to keep unity, as you said, and in order to try to lower the opposition and get more people comfortable with it, then we decided to stop the judicial reform. The original judicial reform started with probably the most controversial of the questions, which is how judges are nominated. Again, I think that it shouldn't be controversial, but it is controversial. I can't deny the reality. It is controversial. And so we decided to put that, to pause that, and to start first of all negotiating. When we started negotiating at the president's house in order to try to get it to a commonly agreed proposal, unfortunately that didn't happen. And so we decided to go into another route, which again, people who oppose the judicial reform probably think that it's not okay that we did that. But you have to remember the other side of the coin. People who elected us want us to promote this judicial reform. When I'm in the field speaking to Likud members, this is one of the most important things for them. It's something that's very, very deeply ingrained in their will, and they really want us. So we can't just tell them, oh, there's no agreement, so we're not going to promote it. That's not how democracies work. We got a mandate from our people, and so we have to promote the agenda that they want us to promote. But we're still doing it in a very responsible way. What we passed right now, the reasonableness clause, even if I mean, again, the opposition Israel, it's doing its job very, very well, and it's saying that it's the end of the world and that it's doing its job very well. But if you actually look at what was passed, it's a very small step forward, in my opinion. In their opinion, backwards. Okay, but it's a small step, and it's not something dramatic. We're now in recess in the Knesset, and we hope that there will be negotiations in order to get on the big question of judicial of nominations of judges. We hope to get to agreements. We understand now that the politicians and the opposition, sorry for being blunt, I try to be, especially when I speak to foreign audiences, I try to be nice to Israeli politicians on both sides. But to be honest, there's a lack of courage there to get to an agreement. They're not willing to actually get to an agreement because it would mean getting to a fight with the more extreme parts of the protest, right? If in the protest there's hundreds of thousands of people, and most of them are mainstream people who really are Zionist patriots, who care about their country and who I disagree with. But there's a small number of people who are quite extreme, who call for people to refuse orders in the army, who block roads, who do a lot of things that shouldn't be done in democratic protests. And so, but the opposition has proven, in my eyes, that they're unwilling to take a risk of fighting with this small group of people, which they see as their base, their political base. And so because of that, our strategy right now is to try to get to an agreement with them. If that doesn't work, then we'll try to get to an agreement with the people. What does that mean? It means to try and get to a formula that we believe will be able to sell to the hundreds of thousands of patriots out there that are in the street and that are truly worried about the judicial reform. Not necessarily the small amount of people who we find are extremists and that we aren't able to get to an agreement with, but to the larger number of people who are just genuinely concerned. And so those people, this is the next step. I do want to say one thing. Usually when you look at the protests, a lot of people come to the conclusion that, oh no, Israel is in the middle of those very, 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 very strong protests. This is so bad. I want to suggest an alternative perspective. We always say that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Here, you see the democracy in action, really. Like I'm saying, if there were protests like these in Iran, if there were protests like these in Syria, if there were protests like these in any of the in Hezbollah-controlled Lebanon, in any of the places that our enemies live in, they wouldn't last much, right? We see what happens when there are protests in Iran. People get murdered, jailed, etc. And here you have very, very vibrant protests. Some of them, which I believe go cross the line of what is legitimate, and yet we still protect the right to protest. They still have a strong ability to protest, and not only that, they in fact influence policy in a way which is very clear. In other way, we stopped the legislative plan that we had, and we took a break on it because of the protest, which shows the amount of power that the people have in Israel and how vibrant of a democracy is. So I understand that it's scary a little bit to see an Israel that's divided, but we can also see the nice part of this, which is how vibrant our democracy is, especially as opposed to our enemies.
And then I just want to echo that, and I'm very heartened to hear, at a time when the media is certainly has been portraying as, is Israel falling apart here? It's we've all been concerned, and I think most Jewish communities outside of Israel want to see some unity here. And to hear you just compliment the other side here, you said they're Zionists, they're patriots. I think that's very heartening to hear, and we saw it as well when Hasbara fellows were last in Israel in May. When we went to the Knesset, you were one of our speakers, and our other speaker was another old friend of the organization, Idan Roll, who's a member of Knesset in the opposition. He's against the judicial reform, of course, and we just to be reminded of just the way this is how democracy works, and it was very apparent, mutual respect on both sides, and a real love on both sides for the state of Israel and the Jewish people, and it's definitely heartening to hear, and we'll see what comes next, and hopefully it's all in the spirit of productivity But I do have another question about the judicial reform, which is I look at Israel's history, and we teach Israel's history a lot to our Hasbara fellows, and this was a rare era here for the last 6 months or so, where the focus was domestic Israeli policy and not as much Israel's defense and the dangers on Israel's borders. And so I can ask in an inside the family type of session like here, like honestly, just a question for you is it a distraction at all? I mean, we do have Iran is still marching towards a nuclear weapon. Hezbollah and Hamas didn't take a break. Is the domestic policy a distraction at all? Should we be concerned?
So first of all, I want to claim something which is the opposite of what you're claiming. I think that Israel is doing so well diplomatically right now, and we'll put aside a second the terrorist attack that there were, because it is important to also talk about these things, right? I'm not ignoring them, but Israel is doing so well diplomatically. There's no pressure on us for the two-state solution, which has become completely irrelevant, to be honest. In the short term, I'm not saying that there aren't people that want it in the long term, but even President Biden, who wants it in the long term, he doesn't want us to not expand settlements or things like that. But he's not dreaming of a Palestinian state tomorrow. And we don't have we have strong ties with a lot of Arab countries, and so we can finally focus on some of the domestic issues, whether they're economic, which we also need to focus on, and we're not doing enough. That's my criticism of my own government, but we're starting to, just so you know. But we haven't done enough, or whether there are other issues such as the judicial reform and others. Now, having said that, I know that there's a lot of voices, again, in the extreme parts of the protests, that speak about refusing orders in the army, that speak about, and these things are scary, honestly. But when push comes to shove, I believe that the majority, the great majority of Israelis will serve. They'll go to serve, whether they're for the reform and not, because when their children are in danger because they're being attacked, they're not going to care who's in government. They'll want to defend their children. They will want to defend their families the same way that we do. And so I don't believe that there's any real long-term issue with our defense. I will say that even if I felt, I'm going to say something which I hope I'm understood correctly, but even if I felt that those threats by the pilots that said that they won't they won't serve anymore, it wasn't only pilots, but even if those threats I felt should be taken seriously, I would fear caving in to military officials more than actually these military officials doing what they said. Why? Because the minute the military ends up being the one deciding what policy is legitimate and what isn't, and not the people, then we stop being a democracy. And all the protesters that are screaming democracy, then there's no democracy. The minute that the people deciding what our policy is the military. In a democracy, the military does what policymakers tell them. They don't tell policymakers what policy to enact. And so this is a very, very important point. Now, after saying that Israel is very strong, Israel is very ready for every single threat that is being thrown at us. This is being said time and time again by the chief of staff of the army. He is paying close attention to this whole thing, all the threats of refusal of orders. He's placing close attention. He's taking them very seriously, maybe even more seriously than I am, to be honest. But he is taking them serious and paying close attention. But he's saying time and time again that we're very strong and that we can address any threat that will be thrown at us. And I'm very confident. I can't speak too much about these things because I'm in the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, and I can tell you that I'm also confident that we're not only ready, but we're as ready as ever in order to address any threat.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm going to ask you one more question. We'll open it up to the audience, which I know we have a few people wanting to ask questions here. So now would be the time if you'd like to raise your hand. You just click participants down below and hit the little hand icon if you want to ask your question that way. Otherwise, you feel free to leave it in the chat as well, and I can ask it. And I see the questions coming in, so I'll be quick with mine here, which and it is on foreign affairs, and I just want to kind of follow up with it's interesting because when you and I were in university 10, 15 years ago, we were all sort of the language then in the Jewish and pro-Israel community was about the delegitimization of Israel. That was kind of what we were worried about. Today, we're seeing new relationships for Israel in Asia and in Africa, and of course, the Abraham Accords. I mean, with actual peace agreements with several Arab countries. And Dan, you're now one of the new generation of Israel's leaders in the Knesset, and you've now been inaugurated to the Knesset in a post-Abraham Accords era, right? And so how does that influence the way you look not at Israel's defense, but at its diplomatic relationships around the world? And what insight can we take here as we look to the future? And so I'll leave the question at that.
So first of all, you're right. The level of how groundbreaking the Abraham Accords are is something that we haven't digested yet. It's really it's revolutionary. Basically the Arab-Israeli conflict has ended. Basically, I mean, Netanyahu likes to say that this will happen only after we have a deal with the Saudis. Let's be honest, the Saudis tomorrow aren't opening a war with Israel, right? Whether they're signing a deal with us or not, whether there's a peace agreement, a formal peace agreement with them or not, they're already letting us use their airspace. There's already some unofficial. I've read on international news. That's how Israelis like to say it. I've read on international news that there are informal talks between Saudis and Israelis, and etc. etc. And so the Arab-Israeli conflict has basically ended, and there's still other conflicts that Israel is involved in, whether it's the Israel-Palestinian conflict, which is a local conflict, or definitely the Israel-Iran conflict, which is very worrisome to us, obviously, because of the nuclear weapons that could be involved there, or Hezbollah. To be honest, it's mostly Israel against Iran and all of its proxies. But the Israeli-Arab conflict, in that sense, is basically over. It's something which is completely revolutionary. It's something which changes our standing in the world. I can tell you that when I go. It's quite crazy. When I go now in the IPU, I told you, in the International Parliamentaries Union, and I meet parliament members from all around the world. So first of all, things that I didn't know before I was a parliament member, Europe hates us less than I thought. I mean, there are people in Europe that hate us, that's true. But at the end of the day, they see us as part of the Western world, which I wasn't sure that was true. That's actually kind of comforting. But the other thing that's really incredible is that you go in these places and some of your natural partners, when there are votes against radical Islam, are actually countries such as the Emirates, such as Bahrain, Morocco, and they also are in touch. We're not in touch directly with them, but they're in touch with the Saudis. And there's this whole front against radical Islam because they're just as afraid of radical Islam as we are. In fact, they're even more afraid of radical Islam than we are. And you have this relationship, which I mean, 3 years ago we thought they were completely impossible. We thought that those were completely impossible. Now, looking forward, I think that the opportunities for Israel in this new reality, we've just started scratching that surface. We've just started scratching that surface when it comes to connecting Israel to through infrastructure to the east, through whether it's trains that would go from Kiryat Shmona all the way to Riyadh one day, hopefully, or whether it's I mean their airspaces have been freed, but there's a lot of other things and partnerships that can be done. I think that Israel can become now a real center for international trade, because we're geographically centered in a place which is perfect for that. It's just that we used to be blocked on the east by all of our enemies, but now this blockage is basically done with. And so I think we can really see a future where Israel is a central part of the economy, not only when it comes to startup, but also trade, import, exports, etc. And I think that we only started scratching that surface. And I'm very hopeful for the future. I just want to add one sentence. The challenge of delegitimization is not over, though. And the work that you guys are doing on campuses is incredibly important. Especially in America, because at the end of the day, America and Canada, I mean, in democratic countries, because at the end of the day, policy in democratic countries is decided by the people, and delegitimization is something which goes to the people, not just to the leaders. And if we let some extreme politicians within America, or without naming anyone, but you guys can guess who I'm dealing with, who I'm hinting at, or not only politicians, but also some of those new winds of ideologies which exist on campuses. If we let them take hold without responding, without them understanding that even if you're progressive, then you should be on Israel's side and not on the least progressive regimes in the world, which are completely the opposite of all the values that you represent. But you should be on Israel's side, which is actually a pretty progressive country. If we don't work on these things, and then America might go the other side. And that would be very, very bad for Israel, because it's still very, very clear that the biggest source of our international strength is our close relationship with America. And so we need you guys in order to keep that alive.
And thank you very much. Let's open it up here to the audience. And if you're a student, if you just introduce yourself, tell us what campus you're from, and community members, if you want to let us know what city you're from, that would be great. And let's start with Haley. Haley Todd, I see your hand up. If you want to just unmute yourself, please, and go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking with us today. Yeah, my name's Haley. I'm from Regent University. It's a small Christian school in Virginia Beach. And my question for you is actually about what you just said. A lot of the pro-Israel activism that I do on my campus is just emphasizing to people how the US and Israel is an equal, they're good allies for us, and we're good allies for them. I think a lot of times the misconception is just that sorry, my roommate just walked in. I think a lot of times the misconception is that the US is just a strong ally for Israel. So what do you think is the best argument that Israel's also a strong ally for the US?
Listen, Israel, first of all, the connection between Israel and America, if in international relations, usually interests is the number one thing that guides people. I think that the connection between Israel and America is a thing that proves that the opposite is also is also something that exists. Not because there aren't common interests. There are a ton of common interests. Israel and America are on the same side of history. When you see very clearly now the lines being drawn between the freedom-loving countries and non-freedom-loving countries. By the way, even the non-democracies that are on our side, because there are those, you see the way their people live, they're still quite free, relatively. I'm not defending non-democratic regimes. I really believe in democracy, but I'm saying you see a clear line between freedom-loving countries and non-freedom-loving countries. It's very clear where America stands and where Israel stands, and we're on the same side of most of these conflicts, even though we sometimes have disagreements on how to deal with these conflicts. I mean, even if America and Iran and America are both opposed to the Iranian regime, it's obvious that the current administration and the current Israeli government have strong disagreements on how to deal with that regime that they both don't agree with, and that they both see as a regime that they don't want. But it's very clear that we're on the same side. But it's not only because of these interests, and I wouldn't minimize it to only these interests and these fact that we're on the same side. The values of the two countries are incredibly at the source. Really, they're incredibly close. I mean, when America was created, they saw themselves as the new Israel. They named countries, they named cities after Jerusalem and Bethlehem. I think it's one of the only countries in the world where you actually have those biblical cities that are there. And it's because the explorers saw themselves no less exploring than the Jews that came to Israel 3,000 years back. And so there's this very, very deep connection, the connection to the Bible, of course, the connection to democratic values, to liberal values. All of these connections are very, very deep. And I think that that's really the source of our connection. That's why I'm actually sometimes a little bit worried of the winds of change that are when it comes to the values in America. I hope that they stay in a small minority, and that's my hope. That's the way I see it right now, because I see that whenever they try to grow their power politically, they fail, which I'm happy with. But still, I'm still worried of that, because at the end of the day, it's a question of values more than interests. I hope I answered.
And thank you for that. And we're getting close to the 1 hour mark, which is when we're supposed to wrap up. We have so many questions. Can you stay on for about 10 more minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Does that work? Okay. Let me turn it over to Nettie Lichtman here. Nettie, I see your hand up. If you want to introduce yourself and go ahead.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Again.
All right. Yeah, so my name is Nettie Lichtman. I go to the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And my question is kind of going back to the theme of the Zoom call, which is about fighting anti-Semitism on campuses and being united. I hear the sentiment of that we have to fight it anywhere we see it, everywhere. But I feel like the reality is that we can't really stretch ourselves out that thin to be focusing on every single area where there's anti-Semitism or anti-Israel sentiment. Do you have any areas or people in particular in which you would recommend that we put our energy towards? Like, do you think that we should be strengthening the Jewish community in terms of Zionism? Do you think that we should be looking at people on campus? So where do you think that we should be devoting our energy? Where do you feel like is the most beneficial?
I'll give you an answer that you won't like, because I think that you're right that as an individual you can't do everything, and you need to the question that you asked is very personal, in my opinion. I think that as a community and as a people, we need to be everywhere. In other words, we need to definitely strengthen the connection of the Jewish community to Israel. That's something that I try to work on also from the Knesset, and that's definitely something that's very important. But we also need to strengthen the connection we have with Christian Zionists, which are some of our greatest allies. And we also have to know how to fight against the squad and all of these people. Here, I said it after 4 times being politically correct and not saying the squad. I ended up saying it. But we need to know how to fight these people, and we need to know we need to know how to fight all the fronts. But the question that you asked makes sense on a personal level. Where should you focus your energy? And that's a very personal question, and it depends on what your passion is, I think, more than anything else. And so I don't know you well enough in order to give you advice. But I think that it's a personal question that you need to ask yourself more than something that's right for everyone.
Then that leads me to the next question, which was another advice question. And actually, I'm going to ask it here because we're getting it. I've gotten it from 3 different students. So I've got I've got Nessa from Rutgers, thank you, and we have Rivka from McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, and Jake Stone from Colorado at Boulder. Different parts of the continent here, and you all asked the same question, which is, Dan, as someone who worked on campus, but you also represent Israel now on the world stage. It's that advice question. What advice do you have for us as Jewish and pro-Israel student leaders? And I think you may have just said, I don't give advice, but I think everyone wants your advice.
No, I didn't say you don't give advice. I'll just say one thing, which is I'm not sure it's good advice, but I'll tell you that's something that I know that was true for me, and I think it's true for everyone who wants to succeed in public service in general. And Alan, I think that you can also comment on that because you're also in public service in your way. And I think that's the willingness to give up a lot in order to focus on things you believe in. There's always opportunities that are more lucrative and more sure and more safe than going all in into public service, into public diplomacy, into trying to make your career pro-Israel issues. And there's always things that are more sure. And you have to make a decision that you're willing to give up all of these other options in order to focus all your energies on that. It's not the only model, by the way. There's a lot of very good people out there that have very nice careers, very strong careers, and that help Israel either financially or on their part-time or things like that. And that's fine. That's also a model which is very reasonable, and we thank everyone for everything they do for Israel. But I'm saying if you want a career in that, then you have to be willing to give up a lot. I'm not sure that's the that makes people happy to hear that advice, but it's the hard truth.
I might just add my own answer to that, which is I would also give you the advice to, if you haven't yet, come to Israel with us at Hasbara and spend 2 weeks with us, learning how to and working with your peers on how to organize back on campus and how to write op-eds and how to work with student government, and all of those skills take practice, and that's what we do at Hasbara, and which leads me to just our conclusion here, and a quick public service announcement here for the students that are here. Tell your peers. Applications are open now for December. It's that time again. We'll be taking a Hasbara mission to Israel. We'll have students all across Canada and the U.S. And December 24th is when we're going this winter. And most of the students on the call, you are Hasbara fellows. You've been with us. Many of you were with us in May, which means you heard member of Knesset Dan Illouz speak at the Knesset. Please help us reach your peers and help your peers learn what you learned. And now is the time to encourage them to apply for December. So thank you all for being here. And I just want to end with a thank you. MK Illouz, Dan, it really means a lot for you to make the time here. And I know, now in your career as a member of Knesset, as one of Israel's leaders, there's a lot on your plate. And it means a lot that you still make student leadership, that you make our issue of fighting for Israel and fighting anti-Semitism on university campuses, that you still make it a priority. And we want to thank you for meeting with us in person when we were there in May, and now do this with us over Zoom. It really means a lot. And so I want to thank you. And I hope it'll work out, and we'll see you in the Knesset next time we're in town as well.
In December, I'm supposed to be in the States, so let's hope that we don't miss each other.
Soon, whenever it is, twice a year we're there, and I know we'll be in touch. Don't worry. I also wanted to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you to the students. Thank you for taking the time here in the middle of your day, and I want to thank all of our community members, those of you who help make our work possible through your financial support, through your volunteering. Really means a lot for you to take the time. And thank you very much. Apologies for those who had questions. I'll make my promise and my announcement If I didn't get to your question this time, I promise you'll be first in line next leadership session. So please look out for that coming up here around Rosh Hashanah time. We'll announce it soon. And thank you all. Thank you for being with us. And until next time.